Hello my fellow kin, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another top placing tournament list review. On today's episode we'll take a look at the unstoppable force of the Leagues of Votann at the auspicious Northern Showdown, where they took first place with something that I would consider to be a pretty big powerhouse of a list. I think a lot of people are going to like some of the pieces included in it, so we'll just do a little deep dive on it and talk about the list in today's episode. But before we go any further, of course, a massive thank you to our channel members, Jordan Stuckenschneider, The Pulp, Sam P, Austri TM, Dabiticus, aka Baba Yaga himself, Travis Taylor, Aaron Easley, Smoky Miniatures, Mr. Wolf, Chaos King Plays, Realist Chance, Ron Helton, Ham Sandwich, Droidiac, Last Draken, Matt Castro, Kituki on Siri, Alexander Swart, Two Tone Terry, Johnny Fanny, Gigi Da Groovy, Anomander, Door Kicker, Ezreal, Rizzle, Kurt Williams, Jade Sadler, Brandon Murphy, Florian Vigneron, Sanguinius's Left Nut, and Nicholas Stapp. Thank you guys so much for your ongoing support. It really does mean a lot. I'll take a quick second actually before we jump into the video to make a little announcement. I am going to be starting a new series for members only. It's going to be called Splice of Life instead of Slice of Life, because, you know, with dwarves, they clone each other. So Splice of Life, I don't want anybody to feel compelled to have to become a member to watch this video series. I've always been a big believer of having information free and available online for everybody. So nothing behind this membership is going to be like paywalled in terms of knowledge or information or competitive play. It's really just a way for me to get a little closer with the channel members, have them a little bit more directly involved in some of the developments on the channel in terms of the future content that we produce, things like that, and a little bit more of like a slice of life format, hence the name Splice of Life. So please, again, don't feel compelled to have to become a member to watch this. You're not missing out on any competitive information. It's really just a way for me to connect a little bit better with the channel members, get some feedback on some ideas that I have, share some life updates, things like that, and get their feedback. So thank you again to our channel members, and we'll be having the first episode of that premiering very soon. All right, let's jump into the list. So on today's episode, the auspicious Northern Showdown held on the weekend of June 27 to 29 of 2025. This was piloted by Lackland Backers. I believe we covered one of his other lists before as well. And if I'm not mistaken, he's on the Discord as well, which you can join free of charge by following the link down in the description below. This list came first place out of 26 players, taking home 4 wins, 1 draw, 0 loss. The matchups included Votann at 95 versus Necrons at 32, Votann 85 versus Blood Angels at 46, Votann 100 versus Drukhari at 23, an 83-70 win against Thousand Suns, and then a final game with a draw of 73 to 73 versus Tyranids. So a pretty big powerhouse of a list here. Some pretty high damage dealing armies, to be completely honest, that were matched up here. So we'll see what the list actually was and talk a little bit about why I think it performed the way it did. So what was included in this powerhouse list? Well, we have 3 E-champs, each one equipped with mass hammers. We have 2 enhancements taken here. The first one is Appraising Glare, which is, in my opinion, mandatory. We then have Wayfarer's Grace, which on a 2-up, the first time the model dies, it gets back up and lives another day, or usually another round. We then have something a little bit unconventional here. So we only have a single squad of 10 Hearthguard warriors. The loadout's quite interesting as well. We have a high-las auto rifle and then 1 kin melee weapon. So only 1 special weapon gun here, and we've opted for a couple extra melee attacks to give it some more punch. We then have 3 Sagittars with the high-las twin bolters. We have 3 squads of 5 berserks with the mauls and mole grenade launchers, of course. A squad of 10 Jaegers, 8 knives and pistols only, and then we have the Magna Coil and APM launcher. Personally, I'm not a big fan of taking the other 2 weapons. I prefer just having all pistols and knives, but I can understand why it gives you a couple extra shots of something that has some AP in it. You could potentially chip off damage from a vehicle. I just find for the purposes of how I use them, they tend to be screen, run in, move block, or try to get me some tokens, and having the extra punch and melee means I don't have to rely on getting line of sight. In any case, doesn't make too much of a difference. I just prefer having the extra attacks. Now next up here we have kind of the heart of the list, and this is consisting of 2x5 Iron Hearthguard units. So these guys are running the classic loadout Concussion Hammer on the Hesir and Vulcanites, and then the Gauntlets on everybody else. Now interestingly, we have one with the Weaver Field, which gives the Hesir a 4-up invulnerable save, and then we have the other squad taking a Teleport Crest, meaning that we're looking to have these guys probably always be in Deep Strike. And this is a really nice piece to have because it does give you a rapid ingress threat. Now I know lately, Votann have kind of, for Votann, Hearthguard have kind of fallen out of flavor. We're not really seeing too many of them make top-end lists. Myself included, I haven't run them in a really long time, but I think one powerful use for them is the fact that it does give you Deep Strike. There aren't that many things in the Votann roster that have the Deep Strike keyword and can meaningfully play the mission. Like, unless you're looking to do, like, outside of Hearthguard, literally, I think it's just the Cal who could give it to a squad of 5 warriors, which it just isn't really there. And I think this, this unit does play a role with that, where it allows you to get a little bit more board presence, a little bit more board control even, and threaten primary for your opponent if they don't screen you out. We then have 2 Hecaton land fortresses, usual loadout SP conversion beamers, and the twin bolters. So this guy here, we have one that's going to be transporting the 5 Hearthguard, presumably with the Weaverfield crest, and I believe the other one is going to be transporting a squad of 5 berserks. Because, of course, we only have 3 Sagittars, we'll probably have one set of, the only set of warriors. 5 will be inside of a Sagittar to split them up. 5 will be on your home field. Then the other 2 Sagittars will be filled with 5 berserks each. And then the last set of berserks is going to go inside of the second land fortress. Then to round the list off, of course, we have some mission play here with the 2x3 Pioneer pieces. They're basically mandatory. You're always going to take at least one set of 3. It allows you to screen. It has uppy downy. It's good mission play. So, like I said, this list has a ton of damage, a ton of offensive ability, and I think it's quite durable as well when you consider, relatively durable, when you consider the Hearthguard and the land fortresses. It's just a lot of high toughness units to get through, and everything here can punch above its weight class, especially, of course, because Leagues of Votann, you get your double tokens, you have a lot of good synergy here with stratagems, like shooting back at something that was judged, or even potentially just using Armor Contempt on your Hearthguard and maybe even saving on 2s if you're inside of cover and your opponent doesn't ignore it. So we'll talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of the list, because I do have some thoughts about it, and we'll kind of see how it fits into the meta and why I actually kind of think Hearthguard are like the anti-tank pick, if that makes sense. We'll talk about that too. So what are some of the strengths here? Well, like I said, I think it's a great anti-knight list because, first of all, you have enough tools here to deal with knights effectively. I'm really happy to see the 3 berserks in here alongside the Hearthguard units, because what this means is, with the changes to the toughness brackets and the wound counts and things like that that happen with knights, a set of berserks, if the opponent only has a single judgment token on their baby knight, let's say they touched an objective marker, you put Appraising Glare on it, you give it 1 token, right? So it allows you to judge the big knights, and then the little knights you're going to rely on using Appraising Glare. So if they touch an objective, Appraising Glare, give them 1 token, you send your berserks in, and on average, the berserks do about 13.3 damage to a baby knight that has a single token, because now they're strength 9 versus the new toughness 9 of the baby knights means you wound them naturally on 4s. So if they are judged, you wound them on 3s. If they're not judged, you wound them on 4s. So that's a pretty significant, I think, increase in damage ability here that's less reliant on using tokens. It also means if they have just a single token on them, you could bump up that AP, which essentially guarantees you kill the knight in melee. Otherwise, on average, you kill it just clean, exactly, if you're able to get a single judgment token on it and charge a full squad in. So I think because of that, you have a lot of good, solid tools that can deal with baby knights. And then for the bigger knights, of course, you have the land fortresses, you have the Sagittars, you have the 3 E-champs, which I think are quite clutch because they basically walk around with las cannons in melee. So 3 las cannon attacks basically in melee. They do mortal wounds on the charge. They're going to wound big knights on 2s if they're double judged because they're strength 12, and the big knights are all toughness 11. Sorry. So I think it's just like really efficient into that army. And on top of that, you also have the Hearthguard, which I think are a really interesting anti-knight list. And by that, what I mean is, if you consider the fact that everybody's kind of teching for knights, leaning a lot heavier into the skew of anti-tank pieces, that means they don't necessarily, that means like they can't really deal with horde armies, I would say, like horde units. And so, one of the theories is that if you have armies that are doing heavy anti-knight skews, you could have other armies that bring a lot of MSU or like big bricks of infantry, low toughness to kind of flood the board. And the armies that brought the anti-tank aren't going to be able to effectively deal with the armies that have that have all the infantry in them. So it's kind of like this rock, paper, scissors. Where the Hearthguard come in clutch, in my opinion, is that not only do they facilitate the destruction of a knight, right? Like outside of the land fortress, you have the E-champ, like I just mentioned. But they also allow you to like anti-tech into some of the counter lists that would have some of those horde units instead. So think about something that's like, oh, like GSC is going to flood the board. Like, okay, you can try, but my Hearthguard are going to pick up a full brick. AC/DC bricks, for example, as well. If someone's like, hey, you know, I anticipate there's going to be a lot of knights, there's going to be a lot of anti-tank weapons, I'm going to bring big bricks of cursed cultists. The Hearthguard laugh at that. So I think it's a really nice piece that's actually gained a little bit of value in this new meta because they can play both games really well. They could play anti-tank when they get into melee potentially. They are only strength 8, but your whole kind of like Votann list can support killing and dealing with tanks and knights. And then you also have the ability, of course, to deal with like the opposite end of the spectrum, which is if somebody brings a bunch of high wound count, huge bricks of infantry to deal with armies that have all anti-tank. Now you can also stomp that army as well. So I think it's just like really well-rounded. It allows you to play both sides of the meta, and I think it makes it a super relevant choice. Also, it has really strong primary presence, right? Like Hearthguard, you know, they are only 2 wounds apiece, but they are Hearthguard with a 2-up save. You have land fortresses that are toughness 12 with a 2-up save. So a lot of good high durability, a decent wound count units that have good saves. So theoretically, you shouldn't be losing primary all that much, which could help explain why the pilot opted for only 1 squad of warriors instead. There's been a heavy investment in holding your own primary, so as long as you can hold your home and hold one of your expansions, usually you'll be able to keep a pretty draw game in terms of never losing primary and hitting at least like 40 points of primary each game. And then you could use the rest of your tools to try to deny pressure and take board control and things like that. So, like I said, very durable, very elite for that reason. It helps a lot. It's meta relevant, as I just discussed. You could play both ends of the spectrum in terms of what kind of lists we're probably seeing in this new knight meta. And it has a ton of damage. This thing can absolutely put down knights. Like I said, baby knights don't stand a chance here. They're naturally wounded. Each knight is naturally killed by a squad of berserks as long as they're touching an objective. Very relevant. Your Sagittars wound big knights on 2s. Your land fortress wounds them on 4s with most of their guns because now even your strength 6 bolters are going to be wounding on 5s going to 4s if they're double judged, twin linked. So you're going to be getting a lot of shots through here. And I don't think we're going to struggle all that much into the knights armies. And on top of that, I think this list does exceptionally well into them, as I just discussed. Let's talk about some weaknesses, however. So because of the nature of the list being quite elite, it is low on chaff. So what I typically like to see in lists when I'm reviewing lists or looking at them is the 2 squads of warriors. I think 2 squads of warriors is really nice. It gives you a ton of OC. And it doesn't really matter when we think about durability for the purposes of primary denial. Because it doesn't matter what your opponent has on it, how tough it is. If you could just get 5 warriors out of your Sagittar and touch their objective, you could deny primary for 1 turn. And it's a really inexpensive way of doing it at just 50 points for 5 warriors and landing 10 OC on that objective. I think that makes for a really solid piece to have in a list. And when you only include one of them, 1 squad of 10 warriors, you're going to have 5 on your home objective, and you're only going to have 1 playing the game, basically, right? Like 1 set of 5. So what happens if you pull something like deploy teleport homers in the middle of the game where you get area denial turn 1? You probably don't want to send something more expensive out there. Like there isn't really a big reason to have to throw like your berserks out into the middle. So I think you do lack some of that chaff. You lack some of the screening pieces here. But it just comes with the nature of being an elite army. It makes you a little bit weaker at mission play. Now, that said, you know, I think, like we just discussed, the list is quite powerful. It's quite potent. And I think if you can force fights a little bit quicker and avoid getting into a long trade war, I think you come out on top with this list. And I think that's another one of the weaknesses here. I put a question mark. I feel like the list struggles into slower games where your opponent can kind of dictate the pace, deny your pressure, and just slow the game down by putting OC on your objective and things like that. So again, I put a question mark here. Maybe the pilot didn't feel this was the case at all. It's just my interpretation and kind of like what I see when I look at this. But it'd be cool to learn a little bit more about it if you watch this video and let us know in the Discord. So when we look back at some of these matchups, keeping in mind what we just discussed in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of the list, we could see why very clearly we did quite well into something like Necrons, because Necrons is ultimately a stat check for the most part. And Votann can't get stat checked for the entire edition. We've had really good play into Necrons, into Wraiths, into C'tans. When you look at the Hearthguard brick, this was something I was running for basically 6 to 8 months out of the edition because my best friend was playing Necron. So I got to practice a whole bunch into him at the beginning of the edition when they were really, really powerful. And it's just consistently the 5 Hearthguard getting out of Land Fortress, shooting, melee, they delete a brick of whatever it is you're trying to shoot, whether it's the Wraiths, whether it's a C'tan. So we are one of the best armies to have a response to that stat check. So I could see why we did really well into this game over here. Then when we look at Blood Angels, it's a really high pressure, fast moving list. It doesn't want to play a slow game either. It wants to brawl immediately for the most part. And so because of that, we do have some high durability. We have a lot of vehicles. We're skewing a stat check here against our opponent in a lot of cases. Yes, they get Lance on the, if they're running Lag, they get Lance, of course. If they're running, I believe it's Sanguinary Guard, they get access to Lance. But they're still going to be wounding for the most part on 4s against our bigger targets. You could pop Armor Contempt. And there's a pretty decent chance they don't kill them on their go, and then after you get to disembark and do your damage and pick them up in return. You can also make use out of the rapid ingress threat over here. So if your opponent is setting up for a charge turn, you could rapid ingress your Hearthguard brick relatively close to the objective and the unit that they're charging, and then you get to pay a CP. You heroic intervention in, you do mortals on the charge, maybe you pick up a couple models, and then after that, if you survive the hit, you get to punch it back and pick up the Marine squad because you'll probably be wounding them on 2s naturally. So again, I think it's a solid matchup here. I wouldn't be too alarmed to see this. And then here we have 100 versus Drukhari. I don't have a ton of experience in the Drukhari, to be completely transparent with you. It's a weird matchup because they are quite fragile. The main thing keeping them alive here are some of the shenanigans that they have with the disembark, charge, and fall back into a transport again. But with our vehicles frontlining on objectives, it's probably going to be a lot harder for them to actually bring them down, and you could potentially even keep them tied up in combat for you to then respond because your vehicles simply won't die to their melee infantry threats. So I think this could be an interesting one to talk about as well. I'd be really curious to hear how this game went. If any of you guys have theories in the comments below, please do let me know. Next up, we have Votann versus New Thousand Suns. This was a lot closer. The match here was 83 to 70. I greatly suspect the reason for that is because Thousand Suns don't care about durability. They have a ton of mortal wound access, and unfortunately, Hearthguard specifically are very, very vulnerable to mortal wound damage and to dev wounds as well because they're only 2 wounds apiece. So a lot of the damage that the Thousand Suns units can do just simply bypass that durability that you're leaning into. They don't really care about -1 to wound because they're just doing mortal wounds. So I think this is probably a little bit more of a harder matchup here. I'm not sure about how the pacing went. Like I said, I don't think the Votann list can really support a long form style of play of just like trading and things like that. I think it really does need to be set up, push, and then like you could play really control as well with this because you have the double land forts, you have the Hearthguard that are inside, so you could play a slower game, but you're gonna need to be in the open on objectives. Is really the point I'm trying to make. So again, curious to hear about this one went as well. Lastly, we have Votann versus Tyranid, 73 to 73. I'm not sure what detachment the Tyranid player was running, so this one also would be interesting for me to learn a little bit more about. If the pilot is watching this video, feel free to let us know in the comments below or on our Discord. I think with the Tyranid matchup, in my experience that I've played into it as well, the Hearthguard are kind of whelming into it. A lot of the things there have pretty high toughness as well. They have decent saves. They're all monsters, or like some of the bigger monsters. I don't think they run Tyrant Guard anymore, but that was also a bit of a nuisance for me with their high wound count. So you are kind of reliant on those dev wounds from re-rolling coming out of the Land Fortress to do some amount of damage to these monsters and higher toughness threats. But I do think, again, the inclusion of the triple berserks here, for me, makes the list a lot stronger. Because if you're just relying on having the Hearthguard bricks be your shooting and melee threat, I think you're going to be disappointed. They aren't really that good in melee combat, despite having strength 8 attacks. You know, they're quite volatile because you only get 2 attacks each. So I think the Berserks here are actually quite valuable in this list composition because it just helps balance out the level of damage thresholds that you have. You have strength 9 attacks, you have damage 3 attacks, you could increase your AP, you could be in more places at once, you could very easily slingshot off of objectives and things like that. So I think it's pretty interesting to match up. I'm not super confident to speak on it in terms of how it went. But again, if the pilot's watching this, please do let us know. All right, guys, so that's all for this week's video. I do think the list is really cool. Big congratulations again to Lakin for that. I think it reminds me a lot of when I used to play Hearthguard at the beginning of the edition. I kind of really miss them. I haven't played them in a while, so I would suppose if I had to make some changes to this list, I'd probably drop one of the E-Champs with the enhancement Wayfarer's Grace, try to squeeze in another 10-man warrior brick with that, and then you get to split them up. I'd put one inside of a Sagittar, and then the other 5 left over would go in a land fortress with the berserks, and then I'd probably just have 5 starting on the board for the other berserk squad. I think that would give you a little bit more trading potential and trading resources to be a little bit more versatile in some of the matchups that require you to play a little bit slower, and just have that extra piece to trade one more turn. In my opinion, it's been invaluable having that number of warriors. It feels like the sweet spot. 2 squads of 10, which is really 4 squads of 5, just gives you enough pieces to play the game. And I think that that's quite nice. But outside of that, that's probably the only change I would make. I think it's a really fun list. I would definitely try this out and recommend if you guys are looking to get Hearthguard back on the table. Use this as a core design. It's very much in line with one of the start collecting videos I made earlier this year. Feels like it's something that has very good competitive play, and as we just saw in this event, did very well. So a big congratulations again to the pilot on his performance. Now, before we wrap the video up, I just want to say Friday, July 18th at 2 p.m. EST, we are going to be going live for the big summer preview. I have such a feeling that we are going to get the reveal. They have to. It has to come out this time around. They will not wrong us again a second year in a row. It's going to happen at this reveal, and I hope to see all of you guys there because we do have some surprises in store for the viewers. So everybody, thanks so much for tuning in, and thank you, of course, to our channel members, and I'll catch you all in the next one.